Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igwe. Every Saturday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. This week, in Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria fined Moniepoint and OPay 1 billion naira each in Q2 2024 for compliance violation, adding to its regulatory clampdown. Are these measures necessary for financial stability, or could they hinder fintech innovation? Nigeria recorded a 5.81 trillion trade surplus in Q3 2024, with exports surging 98% from last year. While this marks 8 consecutive positive quarters, the surplus dipped compared to Q2. Can Nigeria maintain this trend amidst the global market shifts? Our last story is on Ghana. John Mahama won Ghana's 2024 presidential elections with over 53% of the votes. A smooth transition is in progress with his inaugural set for December 11th. What will Mahama's leadership mean for Ghana's future? Joining us for insights is Mr. Samuel Atiku, a policy analyst, to talk about the Nigerian stories, and Kofi Agayi, SBM's lead Ghana analyst, to speak about the return of Mahama. Let's get right into it. So these penalties on fintech are stemming from the routine audit of the fintech sector in Nigeria, and it's highlighting an increasing scrutiny on the country's rapidly expanding digital fintech financial services. What do you think this has led to these compliance violations? Why are we seeing heavy fines? And what might these penalties affect the growth of the fintech sector in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to look at both sides of the coin, and then we can now infer and draw conclusions as to whether the measures the Central Bank of Nigeria is taking is appropriate at this time. But for context, this issue had to stems from the KYC, that's the Know Your Customer process that most of these fintech companies have adopted. Now, we all know that one of the biggest impediments to financial inclusion in Nigeria is one way or the other connected to documentation. There is serious documentation burden around um, having access. For a good example is that how many Nigerians even have access to electricity, utility bills that they need to submit. So a whole lot of people don't think that they are not even connected to the grid system. Talk less of um, now opening account and then you're required to submit certain form of document and all those kind of things. And that raises a whole lot of questions. So we were presuming that some of those barriers will be lowered in the face of the challenges we are having. But the central bank had done an audit and they said, oh, these fintech companies were culpable. And for that, they are charging them a 1 billion naira each. Now, what do we mean? I mean, we could look at it from this standpoint that yes, we need to ensure that there are no systemic risk within the system in Nigeria, and those risks are not as a result of non-compliance. That is true, and every country that have a financial system must ensure that that financial system is not opening up to financial crimes, things like fraud, money laundering. You're not fostering this bad customer attitude where they are where you begin to have challenges and trust within that system. So you must ensure that definitely there are rules and those rules are obeyed. So when you look at it from that standpoint, you say, oh yeah, the central bank is doing fantastic work, but there are potential drawbacks. And I will tell you, the first thing is about excessive penalties. Nigeria is becoming notorious for actually using the concept of excessive penalties, charging these organizations 1 billion naira, right, in fine. Think about it in that fold. I think that is excessive, and of course, that could disrupt their operations. If we look at it, if they don't have a deep pocket, it could significantly disrupt their operations. And it's not new. Uh, why we are saying this, if you look at India, between 2018 and 2020, if you remember, the Reserve Bank of India did clamp down on digital wallets, and they also put forward the KYC mandates as the reason why they were clamping down on them. In fact, if you recall, if you look at the news around Paytm, that organization nearly went bankrupt because of that. And whether we like it or not, the fintech sector in India has slowed considerably because of those measures. If you look at Kenya in 2022, if you remember also, the Central Bank of Kenya did almost similar things where they even suspended several apps that people were using to access credit. That disruption alone actually more like created a lot of financial crisis that some small businesses went belly up. And of course, you can also say, okay, this is Africa, these are developing countries. In the US also, if you look at what the US government did with Wells Fargo, and they created a whole lot of regulatory systems. If you remember, the new incoming president of America is even saying he's going to roll back some of those regulations because whether we like it or not, they are evident on the street that those regulatory measures had made it very difficult, had increased compliance costs for a lot of businesses, and then people are struggling. So I'll putting it together so that I don't talk too much. I think there are drawbacks. We have to be careful as a country so that one, we don't put operational strains on businesses that are just trying to come up, especially within our fintech sector. We want to ensure that there's that the market perception is that, especially for investors, that Nigeria is not an heaven of regulatory burden. We don't want to send that to the market. So anybody that wants to come into the country, maybe to set up business, they are afraid because of what the central bank or one regulatory company will do. We're a country of almost more than 200 million people. We need all the investment we can have so that the country can expand rapidly and begin to grow fast. Fortunately, putting regulatory burden on businesses is not a good way to begin to draw investors.
I mean, it's interesting how, KYC is still an issue. Going back to when, the regulatory reforms that we've seen with the introduction of technology. We see how the CBN regulate and bring in the BVN. And we're also seeing Nigeria coming with our digital identity with NIMC. So thinking back, I'm saying we have NIMC, we have BVN operating. Why is it still a challenge that fintechs are facing KYC issues at this time? Isn't the BVN and our digital identity, which is our national, the name, supposed to solve these problems and ensure that we don't even, this is not even is a no issue, basically.
I mean, you're absolutely very correct. Ideally, the every identity system we have in Nigeria should have been synced together. The mere fact that you open a phone, you have a phone number in Nigeria, means that you have dropped your biometric information. Your identity and the footprint of your identity is known to everybody. That alone should be able to guarantee you certain things. That's one. Two, there's the NIN, the National Identity Number. What do you call it now? That is there. Then you go to the bank again, and then when you go to the bank, before you can open a bank account, if you know, you have to give them is it the BVN? You have to give them the bank verification
Yeah,
number.
BVN, yeah.
They will ask for your and on top of all these things, they still expect you to maybe carry utility bill and go and give them NEPA bill, or like maybe it's not
Yeah, the
NEPA, is it
utility
PHMS?
bill.
So
Yeah.
for me personally, it shows clearly that maybe people need to sit down and we need to have a conversation about what is important and what is not important. And because maybe some people did not ask, or maybe they did not scan it well, or maybe did not do this one, you are now charging them 1 billion naira. So what would that billion naira do? It's going to again, it's a non-issue. I don't think so. And that's why the central bank needs to be transparent around what they really found and why they're actually going this way. Personally, just one simple identity information is enough. If you want to open bank account, maybe in the US, in the UK, on all those things, how you open bank account, you can literally sit in your house and then you will do it without even sharing anything. They will take your picture, they take your iris scan, you give them your ID card, they scan the ID card. If you look at the ID card, the back of your ID card, it's machine readable. Essentially, you can read it from anywhere you are. On your phone, there are systems and process on ground that you can use to read it. So you can do everything there. I don't know why it's a big body, why utility, BKYC, fill this form, fill that form. And then you create a whole lot of things, and then you begin to punish businesses for not adhering to that. That's just on my own thinking level, but we have to be also very sure that what the audit found is not deeper than that. Maybe they were circumventing things around identity and all those things, and that could be a
Mhm.
problem. But I worry that I've known the central bank to be notorious for doing certain things the way they do things. And I'm 100% more sure if I'm to take the side of the central bank or I take the side of the fintech, I'm more sure I will stand with the fintech because I know Nigeria will take regulation to another level and it's not healthy for the economy.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed some of the setbacks or the drawbacks is that, excessive penalties, and that can affect the growth of the industry. So now, what advice would you give, or what steps can fintech companies take to avoid such regulatory pitfalls in the future?
I think for the sector to grow, I think, and that's why they are called the organized private sector. Globally, there are always forums where conversations like this needs to be had. We are not running, we are not in, using the word loosely, North Korea, where the government determines. We're in a democracy, and democracy involves you to be participate across all levels of government. So the first thing is for the fintech organized, the people that are playing within the fintech sector, they need to come together and begin to talk about these issues. And they need to begin to present their case together to regulators. If not, remember, it's not new. Remember, the fintech sector was growing at one point in time under the Emefiele government, but he scuffled it and nearly destroyed the entire sector. And everybody just went back to their own house and they're trying to bend things over. Now we are here. So I think there needs to be a forum where this conversation, a lot of conference, just like you have the social media week, where people talk about social media, you have the civil society organization meeting on different forums. We need a situation whereby the fintech sector in Nigeria, the industrial players there, we need to convey, bring in regulators, bring in everybody, so that we can have a robust conversation. It's within those conversations that solutions begins to come out. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I will say is that if you look when the president was coming in within the transition systems, when they were designing the transition, they were saying they will separate the banking regulatory system from the central bank itself. They need to split them into two. People that are in the central bank should focus on the mandate of the central bank, which is ensuring that the price and stability of the economy, there's price stability in the economy and the economy is growing. And of course, we can always set mandates for the central bank. The truth is that the central bank itself, as a regulator, I'm beginning to question the ability to regulate anything. They've shown time and time again. In 1990, we had a banking crisis that were exacerbated by how terrible the central bank had been able to manage. If you read the Monetary Policy Committee notes of a whole lot of people that have sat on that committee, especially those that were very interested in financial supervision, you will see that there were a lot of holes and infringements that we've seen across between 1990 and now. I don't want to go to the 70s because I don't know much about the 70s. But between 1990 and 2020, there were a lot of infractions that happened within the banking system. And the central bank itself just fold their arms. That's one. Then, second, also, if you look at the overbearing influence of the governor of the central bank, recall under Emefiele, at some point in time, he was commanding banks not to even donate maybe to Nigeria Economic Summit Group and all those kind of things.
Hmm.
That shows that you are creating a dictator within a democratic setting. That cannot hold. And that's why that power needs to be whittled out. I'm even shocked that at now, and the powers of the central bank have not been taken away. Because if you read the transition document of the president himself, it was white and black written in there that the central bank is going to be shredded into pieces, right? The people in charge of regulation will go for regulation and the central bank will focus on its core mandate. Unfortunately, that's not been done. And the interesting thing there is that even the first speech of the governor of the central bank today also lean towards that direction. My perception is that we need to separate regulation from monetary policy so that the central bank is more focused. And that needs to happen. And finally, I will say yes. Nigeria, when you look at Nigerian banking system, there are big question mark all over the whole place. The central bank focus more on KYC, unnecessary things, right? Why the core issue, for instance, discrimination against businesses. For instance, some businesses, they've gone to a bank to actually submit maybe a loan application. They share the idea with the bank, and then the bank is not protecting their data, very well. You see a whole lot of things around people stealing people's money. You hear it all around the place. Oh, they wiped my account. How is that possible? Nobody's taking responsibility. That's the core issue, to protect trust in the system. Unfortunately, that's not the business of the central bank. The central bank is more focused on things that are inconsequential in the midst of. I'm not saying that they are not important, but in the mix of the problem we have in Nigeria, there are other things that you can focus your attention on. Unfortunately, those things are not taking priority. I think in terms of what we prioritize within the central bank, I think we need to focus on other things. And that's my perception around what has happened.
So hopefully, as I mean, you stated the government has stated in their plans to, separate the powers, the regulatory powers, and the main mandate of the CBN. So hopefully in the future, we would see that happen and, the government to be able to implement and ensure that they build the trust in the system, as you pointed out. So let's move over to Nigeria's trade surplus, right? What factors do you think has contributed to our 5.1 trillion trade surplus in Q3 of 2024?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think back of my hand, I think there are four major things that we can always lean towards. But I think it's important to say that the 98% year-on-year surge in export is not something that we should pay attention to. I think it highlights that, yeah, maybe Nigeria is having some little bit of resilience in terms of international trade. But in terms of the drivers of this growth in trade surplus, I think they stem from four things. The first one is the usual suspect, the oil and gas exports. Whether we like it or not, Nigerian crude oil has continued to dominate, of course, the Nigerian export portfolio. If you look at what we sell to the world, the biggest chunk of it happens to be crude oil. And if you look at the global price of crude oil, it had been increasing. Uh, to whether we like it or not, production seems to be stable compared to where we were a year ago. And then also, I think the security situation in Niger Delta seems to be abating, right? There are still challenges, but it's not as intense as it used to. So if you put those three things together, clearly, the money that coming from what we call oil money, petrodollars, seems to have increased, and that's one of the bigger major contributor to this. But we have to be careful also that exchange rate variability, right, also contribute. Remember, they are quoting the money in naira. They are not
Hmm.
putting it in dollars. So one needs to be extremely careful how government want to sell out the news. Now, the base effect of exchange rate adjustment from last year to this year has also contributed to that. I think it's important to mention that. The second thing is the non-oil exports. Now, when you look at the agricultural products, things like sesame seeds and then cocoa itself, and then the manufacturing goods that we sell to mostly West African countries also, you will see that definitely there's been an upsurge one way or the other in the price of those commodity relative to, again, that's the base effect of exchange rates. And then also, I think also whether we like it or not, second quarter happens to be a good time when people do this trade. This time last year, Nigeria was still coupled with a lot of election, around this time last year, we're just getting out of the election mode, and then people were not too sure. So it's normal for at the transition years are always very slow. So whether we like it or not, non-oil export have grown, and that is one way or the other contributing to it. But notwithstanding also the base effect of exchange rate of those commodities, because again, if you export goods from Nigeria to Ghana, right, the money is not Nigeria that it's not naira that you use as the base factor. It is the Ghanaian cedis that becomes the base factor. And if you look at the stability of the Ghanaian city of this service, the Nigerian naira, and how much it was traded for, you could always put that into the base effect itself. So that's the second thing there. Of course, just like I say, we have a favorable exchange rate. That's the third issue. And the naira had lost its value, meaning that we tend to make, for instance, if you are making 600 for every $1 item you sell to the world, now you are making almost 1,600. it will look as if you are doing well, but in truth, you are not really doing well. But that base effect is important. And it's also important to say that, yes, whether we like it or not, I think we've been doing some strategic agreement across Africa and Asia. Remember, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is there. We have a lot of agreement with China. We have a lot of agreement also with Asia. We seem to have finding people that are interested in our crude oil as of now. Maybe because of the crisis you have in Russia, you have in Ukraine, and then the brewing crisis in Syria, in Iran, and then the geopolitical issues that is happening within that ambit itself. So one way or the other, Nigerian oil seems to have found disability compared to where we were last year. Of course, I'm not saying the crisis was not there last year, but the intensity of that crisis had worsened things at the geopolitical level. And that said, whether we like it or not, they find desirability in actually coming in through this place. And of course, issues around pirates and all those things within if you look at the Houthis, the challenges happening around that coast itself mean that people may not want to go there, especially people that want crude oil. This other side of the war seems to be safer. So people typically will come and trade with you. So I think a combination of that had helped Nigeria push up I'll call it our export, and then by extension, our trade surplus. That's one side of it. I just mentioned one side. The second side of it, which is also critical to mention, is the demand side. Goods that is coming into Nigeria. Now, because the exchange rate had gone up, people are not importing the way they should have imported. People are, because there's no money, right? Everybody's coughed off. So
Yeah.
before you are used to buying cars from abroad, you can't buy it again. It means that we are not importing the way you should import. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the Nigerian Port Authority, you look at the volume of trade that comes into the country, you see that it has been on the downward trajectory. So that again had contributed to, because the surplus is just the difference between what you export and what you import. So what we are importing is going down, and what we are exporting to the world seems to be adjusting up. And
Mm.
because of that, we have a widening uh, trade surplus. So those are the issues itself.
But how can we maintain, how sustainable is this? So Nigeria relies highly on our exports. How do we ensure that we maintain that trade balance? Because it, of course, you want to import less. I think that the ideal case is that you want to import less and export more. So how can we ensure that even when our country, even when we get to a point where we're stable back again and everybody can import stuff, how do we ensure that we're exporting more than we're importing?
Now that's a very interesting question. Personally, I will take a different opinion around that. I
Mm,
don't think Nigeria does enough trade. I don't think we import. I know, yeah, people say, oh, we import everything. Remember, if you have Dangote cement, we are not importing crude oil. Our trade numbers will drop significantly. What we import most of the time is crude oil. That's what comes into the country, really. And because, again, crude oil price, I mean, the price of, I say crude oil, sorry, PMS, right? Kerosene, AGU, and then DPK, right? Jet fuel and all those are the things we import. If you look at what Nigeria import majorly, that takes a lot, the biggest chunk of what we import into the country. Of course, the price of PMS is up. People are not buying it again. People would rather trek for hours. The question is that an ideal situation? And of course, we have Dangote refinery and all those things trying to take away some of those trade. So yes, but I would say we are not doing enough trade. What we need to be, if you look at the country itself of Nigeria's size itself, and you compare our GDP with our trade numbers, Nigeria is moving into a state of austerity. Economists will call it austerity. That means we don't do enough trade. And
mm,
that explains why we don't really have a robust conversation around our trade policy. That's why you see Nigeria as it were, we really do not go to countries and go and negotiate trade agreements the way you see countries that are into trade. We don't do trade enough. In fact, if we are doing about 30% of, even Ghana is doing more trade than Nigeria. In fact, in Africa, Nigeria happens to have the lowest trade numbers relative to our GDP. That's how bad we are. Um, but it's important to mention that I'm not advocating that Nigeria should begin to import food and all those kind of things we can produce. But For context, we have a huge youthful population that needs to be employed. And we may not have the technical expertise to begin to produce trains, to begin to produce machineries, to begin to produce tractors and all those things. Even if we have the technical expertise, we have to bring in, in fact, to assemble a tractor, for instance, you need a whole lot of components. That's over 2,000 components. And different manufacturers scattered around the world will produce them. So the question is that where we should focus on? If, for instance, I give you a good example. If we decide as a country to actually bring in 100,000 tractors into the country today to boost agricultural production, why the trade number will show that Nigeria had imported a whole lot of things, the impact of that cascading effect, you are giving young people a tractor and some of them are doing 1,000, 2,000 hectares of land. In
Mm.
fact, there will not be land to farm, right? You can
Yeah.
imagine the impact of that in terms of food. So it's being strategic around what would bring into the country that really matters. It's not about importing cars for legislators. That is arbitrary, right? We should not be doing that. But we should focus on things which we call capital formation, right? In economics, we look at it and we say, oh, capital formation. Things that will generate income within the economy and will even drive our export. Those are the things we should bring into the country. I may end by saying this. I remember a complaint, I may say it Nestle. Back then, um, when Vasconcelos was actually the MD of Nestle, he went to Brazil and bought a machine, right? As at that time, we were importing malt extract into the country. We're bringing in malt extract into the country,
Mm.
made from barley. But he looked at cocoa itself and said we can use cocoa itself to produce this malt extract to create the Bonvita, the Milo, and all those kind of drinks. So he went to Brazil and brought in this big machine, and then they installed it in Nigeria. Since that time, if you travel abroad, you want to taste you want to taste the Nigerian chocolate drink, right? The
Yeah.
one you take abroad doesn't taste like the one in Nigeria because we have created an identity. So those are the kind of thinking that should
Mm.
go to how we bring in equipment. The interesting thing is that it was a foreigner, it was a Portuguese that did that for us as a country. Just imagine that. So those are the
Interesting.
kind of policy that we need to do as a country to actually shape and shift and end this circle of poverty, this circle of pains and struggles that we find ourselves. So we can import, but let's import things that will create jobs for our young people, that will raise the profile of the country and boost our productivity, not just importing things for import sake.
I mean, really interesting conversation. I don't want this to end because I'm learning a lot. I mean, it's interesting to see how, our oil and gas sector, even the non-oil and gas sector, is keeping, um, is contributing basically to the growth of the economy. And, it's interesting to learn that the different ways in which policy can shape our economy, and hopefully the Nigerian government will get it right, and push out policies that would boost our economy and bring us back. It's really interesting. It's always great to have you, Mr. Samuel Atiku. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for your insights. Wishing you season's greetings since we're in December, and
Thank,
wishing you a
thank you.
Merry Christmas as well. Thank you very much for joining us today on this episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the program. Compliment of the season and Merry Christmas. Yes, I think the reason for the season is always to share loves. And
Yes,
so, yeah, wishing everybody a fantastic celebration. Yeah, things are tough, but definitely there are always reasons to smile.
thank you. I mean, the season to also remind us about gratitude. Yes, so thank you very much. And we'll move on to Ghana, where we have Kofi, our expert analyst, who will be joining us to share about the victory of the presidential elections. Thank you. Hi, Kofi. It's good to have you back on the podcast. Congratulations to Ghana for a successful election. John Mahama has returned. And I've seen from the news there's a lot of excitement going on. The transition has already started, the swearing in, and it's a smooth process. So let's have a conversation. What do you think were the key factors behind John Mahama's victory in the 2024 election?
Thank you very much, Vero. And I think that the main reason why John Dramani Mahama has been given the second term, or he's been given the opportunity to lead Ghana again, starting from 2025 or next year to 2028, is simply because people were tired of the current government and they made the vice president, Dr. Mahamadou Bawumia, who was the main contender to Mahama. They made him pay for the sins of the current administration, where Ghanaians were simply complaining about the hardship. They were simply complaining about the current, living standards and how people were struggling to get 3 square meals, high inflation, high transport, transport fares, and many others. So essentially, the key components or the key reason why or the key determinant why Ghanaians actually voted the current administration out was simply because of the economy, which was paramount at the polls. Ghanaians simply wanted them out because they had given them 8 years and they had failed to turn the economy around. And so Ghanaians were simply disappointed in how the economy was run by the current administration.
And I know last week we spoke about, what the new president would have to do. So now what do you think that now as Mahama has won, with his return, what impact will it likely have on the economy of Ghana as well as the political landscape?
Mahama is aware he has just 4 years, and that 4 years has actually started. Once you have the transition team in place, you know that December 7th or January 7th, sorry, is just around the corner. And then when you are sworn in, it is, there's no honeymoon because he has just 4 years and he cannot come back to the people of Ghana to ask for another 4 years. He is aware that the current economy of Ghana is not in a good place. The country has actually done a debt restructuring both at the external and at the domestic level. He's aware that starting 2025, debt servicing obligation is resuming for Ghana. We've enjoyed some moratorium on the bilateral and commercial side, and some level of payment will start coming in starting from next year. He is aware. One other key aspect of the economy that John Dramani Mahama is staring and saying that, whoa, what have I gotten myself into, is the energy sector, where he knows that Ghana's energy sector is a debt-making machine. Talking about the power sector, if you look on the African continent, Ghana, sub-Saharan African continent, Ghana is one of the countries with very stable power, but it comes at a cost because we have this huge energy sector shortfalls that cumulatively that could hit about $7 billion next year. And Mahama is looking at this and is asking himself, how is he going to find money to buy the fuel for the thermal plant to produce power for the economy? Because he wants to run a 24-hour economy, which means that energy will be key in the next 4 years for Mahama. Also, Ghanaians are looking at Mahama and saying that, look, you promised to scrap certain 4 key taxes. The first one is the electronic transaction levy. Mahama says that, look, when he's sworn into office, you scrap that levy. Second one is the 10% withholding tax on earnings of bets and other games of chance. The other one is the emission levy, and the other one is the COVID-19 levy that Ghanaians have been lamenting over, that this is an outdated tax and is currently a nuisance tax. Mahama says that these are the 4 taxes that when he's sworn into office, all of them will go. Another aspect, if you move away a little bit from the economy, is that Ghanaians are expecting John Dramani Mahama to start prosecuting certain members of the current administration because they sense or they feel that they've engaged in a lot of corruption activities, corruption related activities, and the bell has actually rung for Mahama. He knows that with the first 21-day pact that he has signed, the social contract he has signed with the people of Ghana, it includes Ghanaians getting a clear indication of how he's going to run his 24-hour economy, how he's going to proceed with the prosecution of members of the current administration, and how he's going to start the cutting of the 4 infamous taxes, which COVID-19 levy is one key component of that. So, I mean, John Dramani Mahama is aware of the tax ahead, and you could read from his body language when he was declared the winner of the election that he was happy, but definitely he knew that there is a big tax ahead, especially looking at it from the fact that this is a 4-year period for him to redeem himself of the kind of debt that Ghanaians placed on him, looking at him as the only president, the only sitting president to have lost election, the only president to have been kicked out of power. I mean, so it's a redemption time, and he knows that there's a big tax ahead.
That's interesting, right? So I know that he's going to definitely come in with a lot of energy and focus to be able to maximize the 4 years that he has. But what challenges do you think lies ahead of him? I know that 4 years it looks like a long time, but it's also a short time, especially for him to have the impact I know he may wish to have. But what challenges do you think he might face during his tenure?
The first challenge is Ghana's energy sector, electricity. I mean, it's very important to Ghanaians. If you put out the light, they would definitely put a certain tag on you that you may not like it. Like you say it in Nigeria as NEPA. I mean, in Ghana, if you put out the light, they'll put the doomsday tag on you and say that, look, you are the king of, putting light on and off and not giving us, access to electricity. He's aware. Why? Because he's the same person that changed the energy mix of Ghana from one that was predominantly hydro to one that's more about 60% thermal, which means that every year Ghana would have to budget more than $1 billion to buy fuel, depending heavily on the West African gas pipeline. And Mahama is aware that the energy sector is one aspect that, I mean, he will be looking at and be asking himself how he's going to solve that challenge. Another challenge is the debt servicing obligation that lies ahead. For instance, if you single out the commercial debt servicing obligation that Mahama would have to face in terms of the Eurobond debt servicing, we've been able to enjoy some level of haircuts. Our investors have agreed to give us some level of haircuts. But starting 2025, 2026, 2027, we will resume full payment of the remaining debt, and you have to cough about, on average, just at the external or just at the commercial side, some $1 billion every year to for debt servicing obligation at the commercial level. At the bilateral level, you have the European countries, China, and other countries that you owe also looking at you and saying that, look, you'll be resuming 2026. How prepared are you? And if you look at the big guys who bring in Forex to Ghana and helps us to put the cities, to make the city stable and then also pay our debt, cocoa is number one, gold is another, and then you can now possibly talk about oil. But if you look at the three of them, cocoa is actually the backbone of the Ghanaian economy because it's the only commodity that we get more than 90% of whatever we export in a year. But currently, cocoa is down. Ghana is producing below 500 metric tons. And that simply tells you that investors have actually lost confidence in Ghana. Ghana used to get syndicated loans ahead of cocoa production. Now, this year, they are not going to give us money. The target of $1.5 billion will not come in. Why? Because they are afraid that Ghana may not be able to meet the supply of beans in the 2024-2025 cocoa season. And that's also another aspect. One other aspect is the fluctuating crude prices, where we know that the geopolitical elements in there. This year, for instance, crude prices have never neared fair value levels, and Ghana definitely is enjoying at the refinery side, but on the revenue side from the crude aspect, we are smiling at the wrong or laughing at the wrong side of our mouth because we are not getting enough, just like the same way Nigeria is not. And so it's a cocktail of feelings from the oil aspects. And when you look at gold, for instance, Ghana could be smiling with gold, but the problem is that, look, in 2023, $7.6 billion worth of gold was exported out of the country. If I tell you how much government of Ghana is entitled to, you will open your mouth and say, wow, it's just about 15% of that $7.6 billion. I mean, if you do the math, annually we don't even get more than $1 billion from what we export. So that tells you that the story could look lucrative on the side of gold, but we may not be getting enough from it. And so, I mean, I would say that these are the main hurdles that are ahead for Mahama: the energy sector, exchange rate situation, debt servicing obligation, and definitely how does he find alternatives? Looking at the fact that he's promised to scrap a number of taxes. We are currently under an IMF program, so definitely if you are taking out a certain tax component, you need to prove to the IMF that you have an alternative. What is the alternative? Maybe it's only Mahama who knows at this moment.
True. So it's also interesting to see. I mean, like with the executives, they can't work alone. It's a whole process of the executive working with the legislature and the judiciary as well, the three arms of government. So how significant is the National Democratic Congress parliamentary majority for Mahama's governance? Is it something that would be beneficiary to him, or how do you look at it?
Historic. I mean, if you look at the parliamentary power that Mahama has at the moment, he's controlling more than two-thirds of parliament, with getting more than 182 or 83 members of parliament on the green side, on the NDC side. So essentially, Ghanaians they have not given Mahama just majority, they've given him absolute majority. They've actually given Mahama supreme power, and they've actually made him a supreme leader at the moment. And they are telling that, look, you said that you will do a lot for us. We are not only giving you access to the executive, but we are giving you ultimate majority on the side of parliament. So indirectly, Mahama has almost all it takes to function well. How does he blend the three arms of government to inure to the benefit of the promises he's made in his manifestos? But I mean, when you have absolute majority, definitely you know that power, drunk. I mean, you can get power drunk easily. There's a power corrupt, absolute power also corrupt.
Corrupt,
So how is
absolutely.
he going to manage? Yeah, absolute corrupt, absolutely. How is he going to manage that and make sure that he's able to serve the people of Ghana the meal that he has actually promised? So it looks like on one side a very good 4 years for that side. A lot of expectations from him, because Ghanaians want the LGBTQI plus law possibly signed, because the Afrobarometer survey shows that almost 9 out of 10 Ghanaians are against same-sex marriage. And this is one campaign promise that the NDC used against the incumbent government, that look, they support same-sex marriage. That's why they were not able to pass the law. Now the ball is in your court. How does he, find his way around that? And now you have absolute majority to scrap all the nuisance taxes you spoke about. How soon will you do it? How soon you do it will determine how Ghanaians will trust you subsequently.
Interesting. He has he has massive things to do, and I'm hopefully
Absolutely,
he's
yeah.
able to
I don't want to
accomplish.
be in his shoes. I don't want to be in his shoes at the moment.
Yeah, he has big shoes to fill. But
Yeah,
and to fulfill. But lastly, the elections were peaceful, and the
very.
transition we have seen is so peaceful and it's so quick and fast. There's no um issues or problems going on. What lessons do you think that African nations can learn from this peaceful transfer of power and elections?
First of all, the Western guys will be looking at Ghana and be smiling and say that, okay, there's still hope for West Africa, because, now if you look at Ghana being used as the litmus test for the health of democracy in West Africa and Africa, Ghana has actually passed that test. And many have said that, look, looking at how Ghana actually organized its 2024 election, you can put it on the same pedestal as the US, because, in less than 24 hours after polls had closed, you had the incumbent actually coming out to concede. It has never happened possibly anywhere I've not really seen that anywhere in Africa, in less than 24 hours after polls had closed and results were still being collated. That for us puts Ghana in a very good position. And we say that then it means that democracy is still very possible. in Africa, especially in West Africa, where coups have become, or military covers have become the order of the day. Ghana has shown the world that, I mean, it's still possible to have very free, fair, and transparent elections in Ghana. But how did the country do it? Maybe this is what other African countries can learn from Ghana. Ghana's elections are open to the media right from the word go. And in fact, what makes our presidential elections so smooth and fast is that the media houses actually invest in the coverage of the election. So this year, for instance, there were over 40,000 polling stations scattered across the length and breadth of the 16 regions in Ghana. And every polling station result mattered. You had both political parties collating the results from all, or having agents across all 40,000 polling stations. And so there was no polling station that was left out. Whilst political parties were collating results, media houses were collating results. So we were all on the same page. We were all on the same tangent. That makes it very difficult for any supreme power or any, electoral body, or the bigger body called the Electoral Commission, to possibly massage the figures in any form. Because, I mean, everybody is observing, everybody is on board. And so when the figures get to the national level, you have no option than to declare what the people have actually voted. And so I feel that is what makes Ghana's election a bit different from maybe in Nigeria, where the media is actually banned from possibly calling elections, or possibly collating their own results, maybe aside from what INEC will put out. In Ghana, it's open, and we all play the game right from ground zero.
I mean, those are brilliant lessons, and I know that they had observers from West Africa and other African countries,
Absolutely. Good luck
and it's
Jonathan was
interesting
actually here in Ghana.
yes, and it's interesting that we witnessed this and take home the lessons learned from Ghana. So hopefully, we can see more countries imbibe where the media is given more access, to ensure there's transparency and accountability. Thank you very much. So that's it for today. Thank you both for joining us on today's podcast and for your insights, which enrich today's episodes. To all our listeners, next week's podcast will be aired on Friday, and we'll be looking at SBM's annual projections for Nigeria and West Africa. As always, you can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into the work that we do, visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. On to the next episode. I wish you all a lovely weekend. Thank you.